Well, welcome to the first of 3 sessions to help you prepare for the 2025 edition of the Marmotte Granfondo Alpes. Over the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to give you the guidelines to customize your own personal training plan, especially focused on the period between now and the end of March. The session's being recorded and will be posted to our channel on YouTube, so you can watch it again if you wish to. Here's the complete plan for our 2025 Zoom presentation series. The 2 following presentations will be on the 20th of March, when I'll present part 2 of the training plan, and then on the 5th of June, when I'll present how to get your best result on the day. Today, I'll answer any questions at the end if you don't mind, but you can always send questions to me by email at info@alpinecols.com, and I always reply as quickly as I can. This is now the 5th year we're presenting a training plan for the Marmotte, so it's reasonable to ask, well, what's new? So let me tell you, in 2021 and 22, we presented the entire plan in one session. There were some differences, but not very big. In 2023, there was a major upgrade, and we split the session in 2 parts, which enabled to go much deeper on certain aspects. So in 2023, we went deep on the event demands and on how to build your aerobic base and why that's important. In 2024, we did a deep dive on fat burning capacity, why that's important, and the right nutrition strategy to support that, and of course to support your training as a whole. And this year, we're going to include an enhanced focus on recovery and adaptation. So I encourage you to find the 2023 and 2024 videos on YouTube and to watch the 2 deep dive sections, because I won't go into so much depth this evening on those topics. Here's the agenda for this evening then. First of all, I'll present a set of guiding principles for an effective training plan, specifically for the Marmotte, of course. I'll then show you a framework, a training plan that you can adapt for yourself. We'll then look in more detail at the preparation phase, which is the part between now and the end of March. And this is the part that's really new for this year, I'll go into some depth about how to get fitter and stronger through better recovery, stress management, and ultimately adaptation, which of course is what we want. Last but not least, we'll touch on some off-the-bike training to finish with. Before getting into the meat of it, I want to take just a minute for a quick commercial break, if you don't mind. If you want to do well at the Marmotte, then no matter what level you have, you need to spend as much time as possible cycling in the mountains. That's okay for those of us who are lucky enough to live in the Alps, but if you don't, you need to plan at least one trip to the mountains between now and June. Obviously, you can do this yourself or with your club. But if you come with us, you'll benefit from active coaching with me and my colleagues riding alongside you. And this is particularly beneficial if you are not an experienced cyclist. There's an awful lot of skills and tacit knowledge to pick up before you get anywhere near racing at your highest potential at an event like the Marmotte. So here are the camps we'll be running in 2025. The first one is at the end of January in the Canary Islands, where we can expect to ride in summer kit and warm sunshine while everybody else in the Northern Hemisphere is freezing. You've probably guessed that photo was taken in the Canary Islands earlier this year. The second one is a 7-day camp in the mountains of Corsica in April. The third one is around Mont Ventoux in May. And the fourth one will be in the Alps in early June and will include a full reconnaissance of the Étape du Tour. For details, please go to our website or send me an email, info@alpinecols.com. That's the end of the commercial break. Now, on to the Marmotte then. So a quick reminder of the profile. In 2025, we expect to be on the traditional route. So this is 175 kilometers with 5,000 meters of climbing, including 4 of the biggest Tour de France climbs, which together total up to about 65 kilometers of climbing. There are also 2 long descents and 2 long valleys. So this is a seriously tough event. If you haven't done it before, you're going to be surprised. It's a major physical and mental challenge, and it needs to be treated with respect. It's a big step up from a typical sportive, which may be around 120, 130 kilometers and include up to 3,000 meters of climbing. There's a big difference between that and the Marmotte. Now, before we can talk about how to train for it, we need to understand what it takes to do well at the Marmotte. In other words, what are the event demands? So I went into this in a lot of detail in 2023, so you can get the full analysis in our 2023 video if you want to watch that. Today, this is just a quick reminder. The most important physiological demands are aerobic capacity and fat burning capacity. And the most important psychological demands are the ability to stay motivated and stay positive when things get tough, to stay motivated through the long climbs, which seem to be never ending, and stay positive when you're feeling down. Then there's a set of technical demands. The most important of these are climbing and descending skills. And finally, the most important tactical demands or demand is the ability to pace yourself properly from beginning to end of the event. Your training plan should help you develop all of these. Now, why am I insisting on it being a personal training plan? The thing is that every one of these cyclists in the picture here is unique. Someone who can reasonably target a result in the top 500 or in roughly 7 to 7.5 hours at the Marmotte needs a very different plan to a first-timer who's going to struggle to finish within the time limit. On top of that, we all have our own personal physiology, training history, and experience that means each of us is different. The consequence is that there's no such thing as a Marmotte training plan that will work for everybody, and we're not proposing one. What we propose is a framework and a set of guidelines that you can then adapt and customize for yourself. Our goal is to give you the means to think carefully about the process and to take responsibility for your own preparation. Now, inevitably, some of what I say will not be appropriate for you because I don't know you or your exact situation. So let's look first at the guiding principles for your training plan. The first and most important one of them, if you want to do well at the Marmotte, you must make it a priority. Not only in your training, but also, at least to some extent, in your life for the next 6 or 7 months. If these needs negotiation with your partner or family, which would be perfectly normal, now's the time to do it. Next, you must be consistent. It's no use training really hard for 2 weeks and then doing nothing for the next 2 weeks. Or it's no use only training on weekends. You should be doing some sort of training on at least 4 and better 5 days per week. And you should be avoiding leaving big gaps between blocks of training. Sometimes you have absolutely no choice. I understand that, obviously, if you have to travel for work, for example. But that doesn't mean zero training. You must try and find time for a minimum of working out in the hotel gym or walking around the block or running or swimming or whatever you can do. You may not be able to ride your bike. That's not a disaster, but it is a disaster if you can't do anything for 2 weeks, for example. That really is a disaster. So make sure that doesn't happen. Next, point 3. Where are we? Sorry, having dropped my mouse, I lost. So next, the point 3 is the single most important quality you need to develop is your aerobic base. Unfortunately, there are no shortcuts to this. You need to spend a lot of time on your bike and mostly at low intensity. It's this that creates the endurance adaptations you need without adding unnecessary fatigue. So I want to go into this in a bit more detail because it's often misunderstood. Again, it's a point I went into in a lot of detail earlier, but I still want to talk about it now. So why ride at low intensity? Surely, if you want to ride faster, you should train faster. No? Well, the fact is it's not so simple. Even sprinters, they're only going to do 100 meters on the track. They don't do all their training by sprinting. They do a lot of training at low intensity. Okay, so for us, even more so. The key point is that you get all the aerobic adaptations you need at low intensity. And making every ride as hard as you can is a very ineffective way to train for the Marmotte for at least two reasons. First, if you do that, you're training your body to rely on carbohydrate for fuel, which is inherently limiting, as we'll see shortly. And two, you're limiting your ability to build your aerobic base because of all the extra fatigue. It will work when you first start cycling, and probably all of us did that when we first started cycling. We just went out and rode as hard as we could, and it does work for a little while, but you soon hit a plateau and you have to train differently. So looking at the chart here, most beginners, and indeed many club riders, train something like the blue bars on this chart, with most of their time spent riding quite hard, moderately hard, or even very hard, in zones 3 and 4. Okay, so somewhere between tempo and threshold. It's now been shown that it's much more effective to do the majority of your base training at high volume and low intensity, so that's the red bars, combined with a small amount at high intensity. And this is called polarized training, which you've probably heard of. In the last 3 months, this will become pyramidal as we introduce more volume in the middle at tempo and sweet spot, so just under threshold. Please note that for this to work, your zone boundaries must be set correctly. Most people have the upper boundary to their zone 2 set far too high, which means that when they think they're riding in zone 2, they're actually riding tempo, and therefore creating fatigue for no good reason. It just doesn't help. It won't do you any good when you're trying to build your aerobic base. Much better to ride longer and slower than shorter and harder. Back to our list of general principles. The fourth one is to develop your fat burning or your fat oxidation capacity. I explained this in detail last year, so you can go back to the 2024 video on YouTube. But very briefly, the more you can burn fat, the less you need to burn carbohydrate. And this is a huge advantage because we only have limited stores of carbohydrate in our bodies. And when riding hard, we deplete them faster than we can replace them. Our fat stores, on the other hand, are effectively unlimited, even in very skinny people. Okay, so that's why it's important. Now, the fifth principle is to build short-term muscular endurance. The faster you're going to ride, the stronger a cyclist you are, and so therefore the faster you can ride, the more important this is. Essentially, to enable you to stay with a fast group in the valleys. It's much less important if your only goal is to finish within the time limit. The sixth principle is to increase the training load progressively. If you're currently only training 3 hours a week, you definitely need to increase that, but do it progressively. If you want to go to 10 hours per week by the middle of the base period, this coming 3 months, you should take at least a month to get there. You can't just go from 3 hours a week to 10 hours a week and stay at 10 hours a week. That would be too much of a jump. Your body needs the time to adapt. Seventh point, never lose sight of the fact that your body only gets stronger when you rest and recover. It does not get stronger when you're training. Training breaks you down and it creates the stimulus needed, but you only actually get stronger during recovery. So it's really important to allow your body the time it needs to adapt and get stronger. This is what we're going to talk about in more detail in a few minutes. Finally, last but not least, you should include some exercises in your training to develop your technical skills, such as descending, cornering, and group riding. So we've talked about the general principles. Let's take a look at the training plan framework. It includes 3 phases or periods. First one is preparation, where you prepare your body for an increased training load and develop your aerobic and fat burning capacities. So this is the phase between now and the end of March. The second phase is pre-competition, where you add training stress to sharpen yourself up for the actual event. And then finally, the final phase is the competition or taper phase, which is really just the last 2 weeks, where the goal is to reduce your fatigue without losing any fitness. So you come to the event, extremely fit and extremely rested so you can perform at your very best. Here you can see our framework training plan, which you can download from the Marmotte website under training plan, or just send me an email to request it. It's a framework and not a detailed day-by-day training plan for the reasons I've already explained. And the idea is that if you understand the reasoning and the rationale, you can design your own training plan that's perfectly customized for you. So I'm not going to go through it in detail. Let me just highlight the structure. The first page tells you what to focus on during each period. So you can see the three periods there in pink: preparation, which is polarized, pre-competition, which is pyramidal, and then competition, which is thick pink. Then each of those big phases or main phases is broken down into 4-week cycles, which include 3 load weeks and 1 recovery week, with a target training load for each week. Now, if you're over 50 years old, there's quite a lot of evidence that suggests that adopting a 3-week cycle of 2 load weeks and 1 recovery week might be beneficial. So that's something to think about if you're 50 or over. The second page provides you with a typical training week and suggested workouts during each period. The harder you intend to race, the more you need to do in terms of intervals and high intensity, but it should never be more than 2 sessions per week. And remember, you always need to respect the 80-20 rule. If you're less experienced and your objective is simply to finish, you should focus above all on building your aerobic capacity through volume, lots of kilometers and lots of climbing. But by all means, have fun from time to time attacking short hills or sprinting for road signs. But don't do it too often, and don't try to do lots of structured sessions. These will simply detract from the priority. Okay, so how do you take the framework and customize it for yourself? Well, it's best to be pragmatic about it and start with your constraints, especially training time availability. So be realistic and confirm it with your partner and your family, because that can save you an awful lot of misunderstanding and arguments later. Which days of the week can you train and for how long? What are the family or work commitments that will prevent you from training on certain days or weeks between now and the Marmotte in late June? So you need to think that through carefully, look at, take out a calendar, mark it up, and then you can block off week by week the training time that you will have available. And you'll probably end up with something that's quite a long way away from ideal, because we all do, unless retired people maybe not, but anyone who's working and and especially if you have a young family, it will never be ideal. But that can't be helped. That's life. That's the way it is. We're not professionals, so we have to get on with life as well. So adjust things as much as you can to respect the principles of increasing your training load, followed by recovery in 3 or 4 week cycles, and to respect the principle of consistency. Try not to have big gaps in your training. So now let's look in detail at what should be in part 1 of your training plan. So that's the 3 months basically between now and the end of March. The key objectives or the focus during this period are 1, to build your ability to train for 10 or 12 hours or more per week, and to ride long distances without undue fatigue. 2, and really as part of the first objective, to build your ability to burn fat. And while doing these long endurance rides, try to include some exercises to work on technical skills, such as descending and cornering at speed. These first 3 objectives cover 80 to 90% of your training. The 10 to 20% part is to build strength and neuromuscular capacity. The neuromuscular part is a higher priority for faster riders than slower ones, but building strength is important for everybody. Okay, so those are the objectives and the focus. Now let's look at how to do it. So here's our recommendation for a typical loading week in the preparation phase. The rides are in order of priority. So number 1, there's no shortcut to developing your aerobic endurance. You need to ride as much as possible, so progress to 5 and then 6-hour rides at low intensity. Don't fall into the temptation of riding faster. So I'm deliberately giving an objective of time and not distance for these rides. If I suggested you should ride for 80 kilometers, you're going to try and ride those 80 kilometers as fast as you can. But that's not the objective. The objective is to ride maybe 3 hours this weekend, 4 hours as soon as you can, then 5, and then 6. It's time that's the objective. As you build your fitness and your aerobic capacity, you will be able to ride faster. But the speed is not the objective for the moment. Okay. The second uh, highest priority is to do a second long, low intensity ride, which will obviously be shorter than the first one. So it might be 2 hours to 4 hours. The third, or just a word on those long external rides before I come to the intervals. If the weather forces you to do these rides indoors on a turbo, you can reduce the time I'm suggesting there by 20 to 30% to account for the fact that on a turbo you don't freewheel, you're pedaling all the time. It's like climbing in the mountains, if you will, but there are no descents. So there are no micro brakes on a turbo. So therefore it's more effective or more efficient in training terms. So the time doesn't have to be so long. 3 hours on a turbo is worth at least 4, if not 4.5 hours on a bike. Okay, so then the third session is an interval session, typically of no more than 1 to 1.5 hours at the most, and that includes warm up and cool down time. Let's take a look at what the interval session could look like. We could discuss forever on which are the best interval sessions. Apart from the obvious, that they should be aligned at least to some extent on an effort you can expect during the race, during the event, the research so far hasn't identified a magic bullet, and there almost certainly isn't one. So the interval sessions I'm showing you here are 2 by 10 minutes with 5 minutes easy between. The second one is 4 by 8 minutes with 3 minutes easy. And the third one is 8 by 4 minutes with 2 minutes easy. These ones will definitely work. But if you tell me you prefer something slightly different because you're used to it or for some reason you prefer it, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with you. Now, on the intensity, you should choose the intensity level to suit you, obviously, so I can't it's pointless me saying it should be so many watts. Choose the intensity so that you can complete the session. If you haven't done any intervals for a while, I suggest starting at sweet spot or even tempo, so quite a bit below your FTP. And then over a 4 to 6 week period, you can work up to higher intensities. What you don't want to do is start too high and then fail to reach the end. That's not a good session. Okay, the other question on the intervals is what cadence should you do it at? So my suggestion is to vary the cadence between sessions, but probably not during the session, at least at this time of year. If you do 2 sessions per week, which may or may not be a good idea, you've got to be a strong rider to do 2 sessions per week. You could, in that case, do 1 session at high cadence and the other at low cadence. Otherwise, you change cadence from 1 week to the next. So what do I mean by low cadence and high cadence? It depends on you and what you're used to, but high would be anything above 80 RPM, could be 90, could be 100, could be 105 or even 110 once you've gotten used to it. And low low would be below 60. Could be 50, 55, 60, could even be as low as 45. But be aware that at those very low cadences, particularly if you're at high intensity, so your watts are high, the torque and therefore the force on the pedals will be very high, and that will be stressing your knees and your lower back, maybe more than you're used to. So be very careful with that. You can easily injure yourself. Okay? Be very, very careful. Now, be aware also that any given power, it will probably feel harder the higher the cadence. And your heart rate will definitely be higher. So just be aware of that. A few things to remember when you're doing intervals. First of all, warm up very well before the first interval, at least 15 minutes, and really 20 or even 30 minutes is better. Remember that these sessions are as much about developing your tolerance of a high level of effort, or some people even call it pain, pain tolerance, as anything else. So they are supposed to hurt. They're supposed to feel hard. However, it's not a good idea, at least during this phase, to completely empty the tank. It's better to stop with one or two intervals in reserve. Okay, so don't go to the bitter end when you're falling off the bike. Certainly not during the base phase between now and March. All right, so that's the first three priority sessions during a high load week. The fourth one, some might be tempted to do a second interval session. This could be a good idea if you're very strong, but if you do it, it's really important that your long rides are at low intensity. Otherwise, your training load will be too high, and sooner or later, you're going to end up in a bad place. Okay, so probably a better idea, unless you really know yourself very well, is that the fourth ride will be another low intensity ride, a couple of hours or so. And then if you do a fifth one, it's going to be a recovery ride, just a short one, and only if you're feeling good. And all indicators are green. Okay, so that's the model for a high load week. Obviously, a recovery week is much lighter than that, and the details of that are on that training plan that you can pull off the website. Now, a brief word about nutrition strategy, and then we'll look at stress management and recovery and adaptation. So there are three important objectives concerning nutrition. The first is the main objective of nutrition is to fuel your training load so that you're eating exactly what you need, but no more. If you eat more, the obvious thing that's going to happen is you're going to gain weight, and you don't want to gain weight to be riding in the mountains. The second objective is to optimize your ability to burn fat. Now, I've mentioned that several times now, but one of the part of it is riding at low intensity. The other part of it is what you eat, is your nutrition strategy. And remember, this is really important because it will enable you to fuel the long efforts at tempo you must make to do well at the Marmotte. Without a good ability to burn fat, you simply can't ride at tempo from beginning to end of the Marmotte. It just isn't possible because you can't take on enough carbs to fuel that. And then the third objective might be to achieve your desired weight if you're a few kilos over, or if you pick up a few kilos during the Christmas period, for example, which is not unusual for cyclists. More rarely, some people need to literally add muscle for an event like the Marmotte. Now, achieving these three objectives together means you need to adjust your total calories consumed to be equivalent or slightly below the calories you're burning, while adjusting the relative amount of carbs and fats you eat to correspond to your training load. So the basic idea is to train your body to use fat for its base load and low intensity training, and only use carbs when you need them at high intensity. Okay, so I must have gone into this for a good 15 minutes last year. So I don't have time to do that again this year. If you want to know more about this, do just pick up last year's video and go to the section on nutrition to learn more. But this is an important part of getting your training right. Okay, so I encourage you to do that. Now let's get on to this whole story about recovery and adaptation. The point of training, obviously, is to obtain an adaptation. You want to adapt your body to be stronger, fitter, and faster as a cyclist. Unfortunately, training load doesn't automatically result in adaptation. In fact, for the same training, the adaptation you get depends on what happens when you are not training. It seems surprising at first sight, but it's absolutely true. There are plenty of studies which show this. In one study carried out by Alan Couzens, a well-known Australian coach based in America, elite swimmers with higher life stress, this was a study carried out over the whole season, And those that had higher life stress through the season had a higher incidence of injury or illness and a significantly lower performance improvement over the season compared to the group who had lower life stress. Furthermore, the swimmers who had the top 15% of life stress, so those that were really in a bad way from the point of view of stress, outside of their training, and remember, everybody trained the same way, they showed no improvement whatsoever in their performance for the season, despite putting in exactly the same training as the low stress group. And in fact, some actually got worse. So stress, life stress or work stress outside of your training has a significant impact on whether or not your training is effective. But plenty more studies show that recovery and adaptation is inhibited by stress, whether it be training stress or life stress or both. And all of this stress, what's actually happening in your body is the stress forces you to secrete various hormones that are needed to manage the stress, but which unfortunately have the by effect of inhibiting your training, recovery, and your adaptation. So since your recovery is inhibited and there's little or no adaptation, the risk of injury and illness increases, while your consistency and your training intensity decreases. So in fact, you're probably better off not training at all when you're in this situation. Yeah, it's a sad fact and it's a hard message, but that's the truth. All right, so let's talk a little more about the impact of stress. As we've said, adaptation is inhibited by it because to your central nervous system, all stress is the same. It doesn't matter whether it's an acute stressor like hard training or other forms of acute stressor like traveling, illness, an evening of heavy drinking, or a very unpleasant argument with your boss or your spouse. Okay, those are all acute stressors which have their effect is limited in time, they're short duration, acute stressors. Or they can be you can be affected by chronic stressors, such as overtraining, obviously, or some form of chronic disease. You know, if you've got a flu which drags on for weeks, or if you've got long COVID, or anything like that. Um, or if you've got long-term challenges at work, if the stress at work is just building and building and you never get a break from it, or if you've got major financial worries, or if you've got relationship difficulties, you know, again, whether they're at work or at home doesn't really matter. The result of all that stress is the same. You're in a constant state of fight or flight, and your central nervous system is in a sympathetic state. What's called a sympathetic state is dealing with that flight or state. Fight or flight is pushing out all the hormones to deal with that, adrenaline and so on. Where what you want is to be in a parasympathetic state, which is what we call rest and repair, and that's when everything calms down and your body can rebuild. So that's what you want. Okay, so how do we get there? Well, first of all, we need to know how much stress, you know, you have an idea how much stress you're under, obviously, but let's try and measure it. Unfortunately, there is an easy way to measure your current level of total stress. You don't need to test for the hormones in your blood, but just their effect on your heart rate and especially your HRV, your heart rate variability. So install the HRV4 training app on your telephone and then measure your HRV on your portable phone, obviously I'm talking about. Measure your HRV every morning just after waking up in a seated situation. So a totally standardized measurement. You do it the same way every morning. It takes 1 minute. If you have an Apple Watch, a Fitbit, a Whoop, or anything else that gives, or an Oura Ring, which gives an HRV reading, please ignore it. For reasons which are too complicated to go into here, these readings are useless for the purpose of measuring your readiness to train hard. Okay, the only thing that's useful for that is what I'm suggesting here. It needs to be first thing in the morning. It needs to be under strictly controlled conditions, exactly the same every day. And then you get data that over time becomes useful. So after because what you're looking for is a normal range. If you look at my data there on the chart on the right, what we're seeing There is the daily readings over a period of just over a week, the 7-day moving average, which is the white line, which is very slightly going down, the normal range, which is the gray area, and you can see that all of the readings are within the normal range until the day or until the 20th of March, where it's color-coded yellow and it's below the normal range. What that means is that my heart rate variability is very low, and I should not train hard on that day because it will be pointless. It won't give me any form of adaptation. It will just fatigue me, and it will probably mean that my HRV will be down again the following day. So what I did on the 20th of March was nothing, essentially. I didn't train at all. I just rested. And the following day, it was back to normal, and I was able to train again. Okay, for more on this, you can check out, I have a video on YouTube specifically on heart rate variability and going into a lot more detail. Or if you prefer reading, you can find a blog article on the Alpine Cols website. Now, we know this works because numerous research studies have looked at the relationship between HRV and training response. Yeah, apart from what Alan Cousins, they were the ones I talked about earlier, there's another study I found recently which measured the difference in training response after 24 sessions of moderate intensity training for two groups, one with high HRV and one with low HRV, and they found the high HRV group got literally 20 times the benefit for a given training load. A quite astonishing difference. Okay, so the name of the game then is obviously to try and increase your HRV, because a low HRV compared to your normal range is a sign of too much stress, and therefore you can't recover and adapt, and therefore it's pointless training. So we want to get our HRV as high as possible. So let's start with a list of things to avoid. Avoid poor sleep. You must sleep as long and as well as possible. Avoid spending extended time at your desk. Most of us work at desks during the day on our computers. Well, stand up and take a walk or do something, do a couple of squats or something, at least every hour and a half. You don't stay there for hours on end. You don't have to stand up and walk for half an hour. 5 minutes is enough, but do it. At least every hour and a half. Minimize the conflict you get involved in, minimize the noise you're subjected to. If you're going to be in a very noisy environment, then either wear ear protectors or noise cancelling headphones. Avoid bad, between inverted commas, foods. You know what I'm talking about, highly industrialized, poor quality food, or excessive food. Don't eat more than you need. Avoid social media, excessive social media, especially at night. Don't get into doom scrolling on Twitter just when you should be going to sleep. Sorry, on X or Facebook or whatever you're on these days. TV, keep it reasonable and not just before you go to sleep as well. And of course, intense training also. You've got to be got to be careful. But above all, avoid doing too much training at those moderate intensities. So those are the things to avoid. What you should try and do more of is practice yoga or meditation. Just 10 minutes is enough to be beneficial. If you can build in a habit of doing 20 minutes every evening, that's wonderful. It'll really help. Use slow, deep breathing when you feel you're stressed, when you feel your heart rate's higher than it should be. There I'm talking just your pulse, obviously. Just practice slow, deep breathing, where you breathe in slowly and then breathe out even more slowly. And do that for 2 or 3 minutes, and that will have an immediate impact on your heart rate variability and almost certainly your pulse as well. It'll bring everything down. Spend time in nature, nice and quiet. Obviously, eat good quality, nourishing food, the best quality you can afford and you can get, fresh and not industrialized. Listen to relaxing music. and do as much easy movement as you can in and around your training, in and around your day. So this might be walking, it might be stretching, it might be swimming, anything like that. So all of these things, avoid what's on the left, do as much as you can of what's on the right, and that will help your heart rate variability, your HRV, to be higher than it will otherwise be, and therefore you can train more, and therefore you'll get more. And because of the combination of training with a high HRV, you will get the adaptations you want. All right, we've almost finished, but before we do, we still have to mention an unpopular subject for many, which is that if you want to ride fast and hard, you're going to have to push harder on the pedals, which means stronger muscles. And sadly for us cyclists, the best way to strengthen your muscles is off the bike. Even low cadence, high torque intervals don't help very much with strength. They're important to do, but they're not going to develop your strength significantly. So to develop leg and core strength, you should plan on 1 or 2 sessions per week, ideally guided by a strength and conditioning coach with experience in cycling so that they can orient you to the most useful exercises. The goal at this time of year is to increase the strength of your leg and core muscles. But if you're new to this, if it's not something you've been doing for a while, be cautious to limit the risk of injury. And the best, it's really important to learn the proper technique. The most basic exercises are things like squats, lunges, planks, bridges, bicycle kicks, roll downs, and so on and so forth. But there are many more which are beneficial. Again, the key is to learn proper technique, because that definitely is a risk of injury if you get it wrong. Now, mobility and flexibility, equally important. You should try and do 2 to 3 20-minute sessions per week, or even 10 minutes if you can't squeeze in the 20. Pilates or yoga are 2 different techniques which can be extremely beneficial. You don't mix the two. You kind of choose one or the other. But learning correct technique again is vital. So choose a practitioner who knows cycling and only takes small groups. If there's a really big group, the person just can't see what everybody's doing. So you could easily be making a mistake and creating an injury. And if I keep talking about injuries, it's both from personal experience and from other people I've worked with and coached over time. Now, finally, complementary activities. This is important because if cycling is your only sport, you will build up imbalances in your muscular skeletal structure over time, and soft tissue problems will start to appear. So do some other sports from time to time, like even just walking is good. Running, if you are a runner, if you've been a runner recently, then run. If you haven't run for a long time, don't start it immediately, when you're training for the Marmotte, because the risk of injury with running is surprisingly high. So better to walk in that case, and/or swim. Not much risk of injuring yourself in the swimming pool. Great. Well, that's it. So I've given you the guidelines that should allow you to prepare yourself well between now and the end of March. We have a rendezvous on March the 20th to see how things have gone and to talk about part 2, the pre-competition period. In the meantime, it's up to you. Create your own custom training plan and then follow it. If you'd like some professional help to be at your absolute best for the Marmotte, we can help you, of course, in 2 different ways. I showed you our training camps earlier. If you come to one of those, then of course you get a big block of training as well as one-on-one coaching on your skills. And of course, if you don't have time or the energy or the interest really to customize your own plan, then of course we can do it for you. Sign up for a 6-month coaching agreement and you'll get a custom plan updated as often as necessary and plenty of one-on-one advice. So thank you very much for listening and good luck.